The courtroom air was thick, heavy with the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Marcus Tate stood alone at the defendant's table, his broad shoulders slumped, tears carving silent paths down his face. The judge's laughter sharp, cruel, and unrestrained cut through the room like a blade, mocking the man who had just poured his heart out, pleading for fairness. Marcus wasn't supposed to be here. A mechanic with calloused hands and a quiet life, he'd built a world for his family in the small town of Fairview, where the streets were lined with oak trees and secrets. But that world had crumbled 6 months ago when a single accusation, false, venomous, landed him in this courtroom, fighting for his freedom. The charge was theft, a trumped-up claim from Karen Whitaker, the town's self-appointed moral arbiter, who swore Marcus had stolen valuable equipment from her husband's auto shop. The truth? Marcus had been fixing cars for Whitaker's shop for years, unpaid overtime piling up, his loyalty repaid with betrayal. Karen sat in the front row, her blonde hair pulled tight, her lips curled into a satisfied smirk. She'd spun a tale so convincing it had swayed the town, the police, and now, it seemed, Judge Harold Grayson himself. The judge, a man whose robes barely hid his disdain, leaned forward, his laughter echoing as Marcus finished his testimony. "You expect me to believe you, Mr. Tate?" Grayson sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "A man like you, with your history?" The word hung in the air, laced with unspoken prejudice. Marcus had no criminal record, but in Fairview, being black was history enough for some. The room stirred. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some in outrage, others in agreement. Marcus's wife, Lena, sat rigid in the back, her hands gripping the bench, her eyes burning with a fire that could have scorched the earth. She'd warned Marcus about Karen, about the way she wielded her privilege like a weapon, but he'd believed in fairness, in the system. Now, that belief was crumbling, and the judge's laughter was the final blow. Karen had always been a storm in Fairview. She owned half the town's gossip and all its grudges. When Marcus, the best mechanic for miles, started drawing customers away from her husband's struggling shop, Karen didn't just take offense, she took action. She'd marched into the police station with a fabricated story, claiming Marcus had stolen tools worth thousands. Her evidence: a blurry security video, conveniently missing context, and her own tearful performance as the victimized wife of a hardworking man. The town, already primed with its biases, ate it up. Marcus was arrested, his reputation shredded, his family's savings drained on legal fees. In the courtroom, Marcus's voice had trembled as he recounted his side, the late nights fixing cars for Whitaker, the unpaid invoices, the threats from Karen when he dared ask for what he was owed. He'd spoken of his daughter, Aisha, who needed braces, of Lena's second job to keep them afloat. He'd begged for understanding, his words raw, unpolished, human. But Judge Grayson didn't hear a man fighting for his life, he heard a stereotype, and his laughter proved it. "That's enough, Mr. Tate," Grayson said, wiping a tear from his eye, still chuckling. "I've heard enough sob stories to last a lifetime. You people always have an excuse." The word "you" landed like a slap, and the courtroom gasped. Lena shot to her feet, her voice cutting through the silence. "How dare you," she shouted, her words shaking with fury. The bailiff moved toward her, but she stood her ground, eyes locked on the judge. "You don't know my husband. You don't know us." Karen turned in her seat, her smirk widening. "Sit down, Lena," she called, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "You're embarrassing yourself." The crowd murmured, some nodding in approval of Karen's audacity, others glaring at her nerve. The tension in the room was a live wire, sparking, ready to ignite. Marcus wiped his face, his hands trembling but his resolve hardening. "I'm not a thief," he said, his voice low but steady now. "I've worked my whole life to be a good man, a good father. You can laugh, Judge, but the truth don't change." Grayson's smile faded, replaced by a scowl. He raised his gavel, ready to silence Marcus, when the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Every head turned. A man stepped inside, his presence commanding, his suit crisp, his face unreadable. He was tall, with graying hair and a quiet authority that seemed to shift the room's gravity. Karen's smirk faltered. Grayson's gavel froze mid-air. Marcus's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition sparking in them. The man was Samuel Carter, a name that carried weight in legal circles far beyond Fairview. A civil rights attorney who'd spent decades dismantling cases built on lies, Carter had a reputation for turning the tables on injustice. He wasn't from Fairview, but he'd heard about Marcus's case through a mutual friend, a retired judge who'd smelled something rotten in the town's rush to judgment. Carter had been watching, investigating, and now he was here. "Your Honor," Carter said, his voice calm but cutting, "I believe you'll want to hear what I have to say before you proceed." He held a thick folder in his hand, its contents a mystery but its weight undeniable. The courtroom fell silent, the air charged with anticipation. Karen shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tightening on her purse. Grayson's face reddened, his authority suddenly fragile. Carter approached the bench, his steps deliberate. "I'm here on behalf of Marcus Tate," he said, placing the folder on the table. "And I have evidence that will change the course of this trial." He turned to Marcus, offering a small nod, a silent promise that the tide was turning. Lena's hands unclenched, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in months. The conflict had been simmering for weeks, but now it was boiling over. Karen's lies had unraveled Marcus's life, piece by piece. She'd counted on Fairview's biases to carry her story, on the judge's prejudice to seal Marcus's fate. But she hadn't counted on Carter, or the truth, or the fire in Lena's heart. The courtroom was no longer just a stage for Grayson's mockery, it was a battleground, and the fight was far from over. Carter opened the folder, pulling out documents and a USB drive. "Your Honor, this contains security footage from Whitaker's auto shop, the full footage, not the edited clip Ms. Whitaker provided to the police." The crowd gasped. Karen's face drained of color, her hands shaking as she tried to maintain her composure. "It shows Marcus Tate working late, unpaid, on the night in question. It also shows Ms. Whitaker removing the tools herself, staging the theft." The room erupted. Grayson slammed his gavel, shouting for order, but his voice was drowned out by the crowd's outrage. Lena's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. Marcus stood taller, his tears gone, replaced by a quiet strength. Karen's lies had built a house of cards, and Carter was about to bring it crashing down. "Ms. Whitaker," Carter continued, turning to her, "would you care to explain why you falsified evidence? Or why you threatened Mr. Tate when he asked for his rightful pay?" Karen opened her mouth, but no words came. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their judgment turning on her now. She'd played the victim, wielded her privilege like a weapon, but the truth was a sharper blade. Grayson's face twisted, caught between his bias and the undeniable evidence before him. "This is highly irregular," he sputtered, but Carter cut him off. "What's irregular, Your Honor, is a trial built on perjury and prejudice. I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against Mr. Tate, and I request an investigation into Ms. Whitaker's actions." The courtroom was a powder keg, and Carter's words were the spark. Karen stood, her voice shrill. "This is outrageous. You can't just barge in here with some fabricated nonsense." But her words fell flat, her credibility crumbling under the weight of Carter's evidence. The crowd turned on her, their whispers now accusations, their glares a mirror of the pain she'd caused. Marcus looked at Lena, their eyes meeting across the room. For the first time in months, he saw hope in her gaze, a flicker of the life they'd fought for. The judge's laughter, Karen's lies, the town's betrayal, it had all led to this moment, where truth was finally clawing its way to the surface. Carter wasn't done. He turned to the judge, his voice steady but laced with steel. "Your Honor, your conduct in this courtroom raises serious questions about impartiality. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the State Bar." Grayson's face went white, his gavel trembling in his hand. The man who'd laughed at Marcus's pain was now the one cornered, his authority unraveling. The oak doors swung open again, and a woman entered, a journalist from a national outlet, her camera flashing as she documented the scene. She'd been tipped off by Carter, her presence ensuring that Fairview's dirty laundry would be aired far beyond its borders. Karen sank into her seat, her hands covering her face, as the reality of her actions crashed down. The tools she'd claimed were stolen were her husband's, yes, but they'd been sold to cover debts she'd hidden from the town. Marcus had been a convenient scapegoat, a way to deflect blame and rally Fairview's biases to her side. But the truth was relentless. The footage played on a courtroom screen, showing Karen moving tools into her car, her face clear in the unedited frames. The crowd's outrage grew, their voices a chorus of justice long denied. Marcus's daughter, Aisha, slipped into the courtroom, her small frame weaving through the crowd to reach her mother. Lena pulled her close, whispering, "It's going to be okay." The judge called a recess, his voice weak, his authority shattered. Marcus remained at the defendant's table, his head high, no longer crying. He'd faced a system stacked against him, a town that had turned its back, a woman who'd weaponized her lies. But he'd stood his ground, and now the truth was his shield. As the courtroom emptied, Carter approached Marcus, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't over," he said, "but it's a start." Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Thank you for seeing me." Carter smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "I see you, Marcus. And so will the world." The fight wasn't just Marcus's anymore. It was Lena's, Aisha's, Carter's, and every person in Fairview who'd watched silently as injustice unfolded. Karen's lies had torn a family apart, but they'd also sparked a reckoning. The courtroom doors stood open, the truth spilling out, and Fairview would never be the same. The recess stretched on, but the courtroom's tension lingered like smoke after a fire. Marcus Tate stood outside the heavy oak doors, his hands stuffed in his pockets, staring at the linoleum floor as if it held answers. Lena stood beside him, her arm linked with his, her presence a quiet anchor. Aisha, their daughter, clung to her mother's side, her wide eyes scanning the crowd that spilled into the hallway. Whispers swirled, some sympathetic, others venomous. Fairview was a small town, and news of the trial's upheaval had spread like wildfire, fanned by Karen Whitaker's unraveling lies and Judge Grayson's public humiliation. Inside, Samuel Carter conferred with his team, sifting through the evidence that had turned the case on its head. The unedited security footage was just the beginning. Carter had dug deeper, uncovering a paper trail of unpaid invoices, threatening emails from Karen to Marcus, and even testimony from a former employee at Whitaker's auto shop who'd seen Karen orchestrate the setup. The employee, a nervous young man named Tommy, had quit months ago but came forward after hearing about Marcus's arrest. "I couldn't stay quiet no more," Tommy had told Carter, his voice shaking. "She told me to keep my mouth shut, or I'd be next." Karen, meanwhile, was cornered. She sat in a side room with her lawyer, a harried man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Her confident facade had crumbled, replaced by a frantic energy as she whispered excuses, her hands gesturing wildly. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she insisted, but her lawyer's grim expression told her the truth, the evidence was airtight, and her lies were exposed. The journalist who'd entered the courtroom was already typing furiously on her laptop, her article taking shape with a headline that would sear Fairview's reputation: "Small Town Scandal, False Accusations and a Biased Bench." Back in the courtroom, the crowd reassembled, their murmurs growing as Judge Grayson took his seat. His face was a mask of forced composure, but his hands betrayed him, fidgeting with the gavel as if it could restore his authority. Marcus returned to the defendant's table, his head high, his tears long gone. Lena and Aisha sat closer now, their presence a silent declaration of strength. Carter stood ready, his folder of evidence a weapon honed for justice. "Your Honor," Carter began, his voice steady but commanding, "I move to dismiss all charges against Marcus Tate. The evidence clearly shows that Ms. Whitaker fabricated the theft, motivated by personal vendetta and financial desperation." He held up the USB drive, its contents now copied and distributed to the prosecution. Furthermore, I request that the court investigate Ms. Whitaker for perjury and obstruction of justice. Grayson's jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue with the footage. The screen in the courtroom flickered to life again, replaying the damning scenes, Karen loading tools into her car, her furtive glances at the camera, her careful staging of the crime scene. The crowd's outrage was palpable, a low rumble that threatened to erupt. Karen shrank in her seat, her hands covering her face, as if she could hide from the truth. But Carter wasn't finished. He turned to the judge, his gaze unflinching. "Your Honor, your conduct in this trial, your mockery of Mr. Tate, your dismissal of his testimony raises serious questions about your impartiality. I've already contacted the State Bar, and I assure you, this will not be swept under the rug." The courtroom gasped, the weight of Carter's words landing like a thunderclap. Grayson's face flushed crimson, his authority crumbling under the scrutiny of a room that no longer feared him. Lena squeezed Aisha's hand, her eyes never leaving Marcus. She'd always known her husband was innocent, but seeing the truth laid bare, seeing Karen's lies collapse, was a victory she hadn't dared hope for. Aisha leaned against her, whispering, "Is Daddy coming home now?" Lena nodded, her voice soft but certain. "Yes, baby. He's coming home." The prosecution, caught off guard by Carter's evidence, scrambled to respond. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Clara Hensley, stood, her expression grim. "Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, the state moves to drop all charges against Mr. Tate." The words were a formality, but they carried the weight of vindication. Marcus exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in months. The crowd erupted in cheers, though some still whispered their doubts, their biases clinging like shadows. Grayson had no choice. "Charges dismissed," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the crowd's roar. He slammed his gavel, but it was a hollow gesture, a last grasp at control. "Court is adjourned." He rose quickly, retreating to his chambers, but the journalist's camera caught his exit, her lens capturing the moment a powerful man fell. Karen wasn't so lucky. As the crowd dispersed, two officers approached her, their faces stern. "Ms. Whitaker," one said, "you're under arrest for perjury and filing a false police report." Her eyes widened, her voice rising in a panicked shriek. "This is a mistake. I'm the victim here." But the crowd turned away, their sympathy long gone. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists, and she was led out, her head bowed, her lies now shackles of her own making. Outside the courthouse, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across Fairview's quiet streets. Marcus, Lena, and Aisha stepped into the light, their family whole again. Carter followed, his work here done but his mission far from over. "This town needs to reckon with itself," he told Marcus, his voice low. "But you've given them a start." Marcus nodded, his hand resting on Aisha's shoulder. "I just wanted to clear my name," he said. "For her." The journalist, whose name was Maya Ellis, approached, her notebook in hand. "Mr. Tate, can I get a statement?" she asked, her tone respectful. Marcus hesitated, then spoke, his voice steady. "I'm no hero. I'm just a man who wanted the truth to win. And today, it did." Maya scribbled his words, her article already taking shape as a story of justice reclaimed, of a man who stood tall against a system rigged to break him. Fairview was buzzing by nightfall. Social media posts, some from X, others from local forums, lit up with reactions. Some praised Marcus's resilience, others condemned Karen's deceit, and a few, predictably, clung to their prejudices, insisting the trial was a setup. Maya's article went live the next morning, trending nationally, its headline unflinching, "Justice in Fairview, How One Man's Truth Toppled a Town's Lies." The comments section was a battleground, with voices from across the country weighing in on race, privilege, and the cost of truth. Karen's downfall was swift. Her husband's auto shop, already struggling, closed within weeks, its reputation tainted by her actions. She faced charges that carried years in prison, her privilege no longer a shield. Judge Grayson quietly resigned days later, his career in tatters after Carter's complaint triggered an ethics investigation. Fairview's mayor issued a public apology, promising reforms, but the town's wounds ran deep, its divisions laid bare. Marcus returned to work, not at Whitaker's shop but at a new garage opened by Tommy, the whistleblower, who'd secured a loan with Carter's help. The garage became a hub for Fairview's black community, a place where trust was rebuilt, one oil change at a time. Lena quit her second job, her nights now spent with Aisha, helping her with homework, dreaming of a future unburdened by fear. The family's home, once threatened by legal fees, was safe again, its walls filled with laughter once more. But the scars remained. Marcus carried the weight of the trial, the memory of Grayson's laughter, the sting of a town that had turned on him. Yet he also carried pride in himself, in Lena's strength, in Aisha's courage. He'd faced a system that saw him as less and emerged whole, not because the system was just, but because he refused to break. Fairview changed, slowly. Community meetings sprang up, some heated, others hopeful, as residents grappled with the trial's fallout. Maya's article sparked a national conversation, with activists citing Marcus's case as a call to action. On X, hashtags like Justice for Marcus and Fairview Reckoning trended, amplifying voices that demanded accountability. The town's oak-lined streets, once a symbol of quiet charm, now bore witness to a community forced to confront its truths. Marcus and Lena sat on their porch one evening, Aisha asleep inside, the stars bright above. "We made it through," Lena said, her hand in his. Marcus nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "We did. But it's bigger than us now." He thought of Carter, of Maya, of the people who'd stood with him. The fight for justice wasn't over, it was just beginning. What do you think? Where does justice start, and how do we heal a community torn by lies? Share your thoughts, because this story belongs to all of us.